Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something that's practically baked into our everyday lives. We are going to unpack how deeply ingrained social differences, specifically gender and religion, actually intersect with and influence democratic politics. We often think of democracy purely in terms of elections and laws, but the reality is that the personal, everyday differences we experience fundamentally shape who holds power and how it gets used.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by looking at social diversity in democracy broadly. Then we'll dive into the invisible gender divide, followed by women in political power. After that, we pivot to religion and politics, and finally wrap up with the threat of communalism. Let's get into it.
Section 1, Social Diversity in Democracy. We hear so much about differences pulling us apart, but let's actually see how our sources view them. It's a massive question, right? Does social diversity threaten democracy? While the fundamental premise of our source material is actually a resounding no. No way. In fact, politically expressing our social differences isn't just possible, it's often super desirable in a healthy, functioning democracy. Think about it, when communities express their unique needs, the system can actually respond to them. It makes the whole thing so much more representative. Moving on to Section 2, the invisible gender divide. This is a hierarchical division we literally see everywhere, but it's rarely recognized as a strictly political issue. So here's a thought. Why on earth would we discuss something like household work in political science? It's a completely fair question. I mean, when we say politics, we usually picture massive parliament buildings and voting booths, right? We definitely don't picture washing dishes or sweeping the floor. Well, the answer lies in patriarchy. And for us, looking at political systems, it's absolutely crucial to realize that patriarchy isn't just some vague social dynamic. It's a literal, structural system of power. If politics at its core is all about who has power and who doesn't, then male dominance established inside the private household, that's inherently a political issue. The whole split between the public world of men and the private world of women isn't natural. It's a designed power structure. And society just loves to enforce this power structure with impossible standards. We are constantly sold this image of the ideal woman. The multitasking housewife doing a million things at once, the perfect consumer, the flawless beauty standard. These deeply ingrained expectations, not biology, are what dictate the sexual division of labor, right from day one. Boys and girls are quite literally brought up believing these completely different sets of responsibilities are just the way things are. To put that into perspective, the real-world math on these expectations is staggering. Women spend roughly 5 hours a day on unpaid, invisible household labor. Men? About 30 minutes. That is a massive gap. Society hypervalues the visible, income-generating work of men, while this vast economic engine of women's household labor remains entirely off the books. It's completely unpaid and, frankly, entirely invisible to the broader economy. But listen, this isn't just about who does the dishes. It has literal life and death consequences. This deep-seated economic and social preference for having sons over daughters has actually driven India's child sex ratio down to a staggering 919 girls for every 1,000 boys. 919. And that is largely due to sex-selective abortion. When you map out the fallout of this inequality geographically across the country, it is severe. In some regions, the ratio drops dangerously low. We're talking below 875 in some places. It's a stark reminder that private prejudices don't just stay private. They create massive, undeniable demographic crises on a national scale. Which brings us to Section 3, Women in Political Power. Because, as you might guess, this systemic inequality naturally bleeds from the private home right into the public sphere. Despite making up literally half the population, women's share of elected representation has historically remained staggeringly low in India. Just to give you an idea, in 2019, the proportion of elected women members in the Lok Sabha touched 14.36% for the very first time. And in state assemblies, it often sits below 5%. The feminist argument here is pretty straightforward. Unless women actually have their hands on the levers of power, their specific challenges are just going to remain sidelined. So, what's the structural fix? Well, after being demanded by movements for decades, it finally arrived as a legal mandate in 2023 with the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. By securing a 33% reservation for women in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies, it's a guaranteed mechanism to ensure women finally have the political leverage they need to tackle these exact systemic hurdles. It's a real game changer. All right, moving on to Section 4, Religion in Politics.
We're shifting our lens from gender now to explore the incredibly complex relationship between personal faith and public governance.
Given how volatile religion and politics is today, it might actually shock you to learn that Mahatma Gandhi believed the two should never be separated. No way, right? But hold on. Here is the massive caveat. He wasn't talking about exclusive faiths like Hinduism or Islam. Not at all. What he meant were the universal moral ethics shared across all religions. He believed those ethics absolutely had to be the fundamental compass guiding public policy. And our sources give us some really concrete examples of what that positive political expression of originality actually looks like. For instance, think about human rights groups demanding the government step up to protect religious minorities from riots, or women's movements demanding the state amend discriminatory family laws to make them more equitable. Using state power to protect minorities or ensure equality, those are prime examples of how expressing religious community interests can be entirely democratic and constructive. But, and it's a big but, we need to look at Section 5, the threat of communalism, because this dynamic changes drastically and dangerously when religion becomes a tool for exclusion. The true danger pops up when religion gets weaponized as the absolute basis of a nation. This is communal politics. It happens when religion is expressed in totally exclusive and partisan terms, basically presenting one belief system as superior to all others and intentionally pitting groups against each other. It operates on this totally flawed absolute premise that everyone in a religion shares the exact same interests, which completely erases the rich individual diversity within that community.
And communalism doesn't always look like the tragic massacres of partition. It actually thrives in everyday prejudices and stereotypes that we might not even notice. It shows up as majoritarian dominance, where a majority community seeks absolute political control over everyone else. And, perhaps most commonly, it's electoral manipulation. That's using sacred symbols, religious leaders, and sometimes pure fear to just rally a voting bloc.
To combat this exact threat, the framers of the Indian Constitution actively chose a specific safeguard. They strategically engineered a secular state. Unlike some neighboring nations that might elevate a specific faith, this secular model intentionally strips the state of any official religion. It's a calculated structural safeguard designed specifically to deny any single group official preference. It maintains that neutral ground absolutely required for true equality. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a core question to reflect on. We've seen how private divisions like gender and deep personal beliefs like religion inevitably spill right into our public political arenas. So how does a democracy balance deeply held individual beliefs with the absolute necessity of equality? How do we ensure that expressing our gender or our faith ultimately strengthens our democratic systems rather than fracturing them? Think about that for a bit. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring these incredible social dynamics.